in the best of times. You walk me through my darkest days. Why must I turn around? I ask myself.
Kind of love that makes everything seem perfect, as if nothing could go wrong. I still remember the day I found out I was pregnant. I thought it would be the moment that solidified us, the start of something beautiful. When I told you, you smiled, said all the right things, and I believed you. I truly thought we were about to build a life, a family. For a while, I convinced myself that your happiness was real. You talked about our future, made plans, and I thought we were growing even closer. But then, the excitement you had for the baby felt off. I started noticing how your focus shifted. It wasn't about becoming a father. It was about having a child born in a foreign country. I began to realize that what you really wanted was the opportunity it would bring, not the life we were creating. Then the whispers started. A close friend of yours told me you had another woman. At first, I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces started to fit together. The secret calls, the unexplained absences, it was all too clear. I wasn't the only one. There was always someone else in the background. 7 months pregnant with your child, I waited for you. A whole week went by without a reply, no calls, no texts. I panicked, thinking maybe something had happened. Maybe work was taking up all your time. But in my gut, I knew something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling that you were avoiding me, and every time I tried to reach you, I was met with silence. Then I found out the truth. You weren't just busy, you were locked up in a hotel with her. The other woman, the woman I would later find out who would be having your child. The betrayal cut deep, but I held on to hope because I was still carrying our baby, and I thought once she was born, things would change, that you'd realize what you were doing, that you'd be here for us. The day I gave birth was a blur of emotions. Tears streamed down my face as I held our daughter for the first time, a mix of happiness and heartbreak swelling inside me. You came to see her, and for a moment, it felt like everything would be okay. You held her in your arms, looked down at her with such pride. I saw the joy in your eyes, the tenderness in the way you cradled her. It made me believe, if only for a second, that maybe, just maybe, you could be the father she deserved. Maybe you could love us both the way we needed. But then the holidays came, and with them, more empty promises. You told me it would be a bad time for us to visit because you were so busy with work. You didn't want to be away from me or our daughter, you said. Of course, that too would be a lie, another cover-up. You used that time, not for work, but for her. You spent those days with her, and she's the one you spent a week in the hotel with. Our daughter was just 3 months old when you asked me to marry you. I still remember the way you spoke about our future, how you painted pictures of a life filled with happiness, security, and love. You promised me a whole new life, something better, something lasting. It was hard not to believe you, especially when you held our baby girl in your arms and told me this was the start of something beautiful. We had an intimate wedding, just close family and a few friends. It was small, simple, but somehow it felt perfect in its simplicity. I remember the way the soft breeze blew through the ceremony, the sun warm on our skin as we stood there, exchanging vows. You held my hand tightly, looked me in the eyes, and told me this was forever, that we were building something real now, for us and for our daughter. And in that moment, I believed you. I wanted to believe so badly that things were different, that the past would no longer haunt us. The birth of our daughter had softened you, or at least I thought it had. You seemed genuinely happy, proud even, to be standing there as a father and now as my husband. I remember the way you kissed me, soft and sweet, and for that brief moment, I allowed myself to think that all the hurt, all the betrayal was behind us. I thought we had been given a second chance. I convinced myself that this was the reset we needed. We were a family now, bound by something deeper than the mistakes we'd made. Our daughter was the symbol of that new beginning, and I let that hope carry me through. As we stood together, newly married, holding our baby girl, I let the weight of everything else slip away. I knew it, I felt it, that you meant it when you said, forever. Our wedding night was everything I had hoped it would be. Beautiful, intimate, and full of the kind of passion that made me believe we had truly sealed our marriage, our love. After the ceremony, after the quiet congratulations from those closest to us, it was just the two of us. The world outside disappeared, and for the first time in months, I felt like we were finally aligned. You held me close as we danced under the soft glow of candlelight, your hand resting on the small of my back, pulling me toward you like you never wanted to let go. The way you looked at me that night, it was like you saw me again, the way you had in the beginning. Like I was the only thing that mattered. I can still feel the warmth of your breath on my skin as you whispered how much you loved me, how this was the start of the life we had always wanted. The room was quiet, save for the sound of our breathing, the gentle rustle of fabric as you undressed me slowly, lovingly. Every touch felt like a promise, every kiss like a vow. I told myself this was it. We were finally whole. With each caress, every movement, we were weaving ourselves together again, piece by piece. The hurt and doubt that had plagued us seemed to melt away in the heat of the moment, as if this night could erase all the lies, all the betrayal. I remember lying beneath you, feeling the weight of your body, the intensity in your eyes, and I believed, truly believed, that this was how it was meant to be. You kissed me like you wanted to consume me, like this was the night we would solidify everything, erase the past, and move forward together as one. And I gave myself to that idea completely. I allowed myself to be swept up in the fantasy that this was the beginning of our new life. The passion we shared was undeniable, raw and consuming, and it made me feel as though we had finally crossed that invisible line from fractured to whole. Every touch, every whispered word felt like a binding promise. I told myself we were sealing our marriage, cementing our relationship. For a fleeting moment, I was at peace. I let myself drown in the belief that love, passion, and this child we had brought into the world were enough to hold us together. That somehow we had made it through the storm and found our way back to each other. But as the night ended, and you lay beside me, peacefully asleep, a small, unwelcome whisper echoed in the back of my mind. I wanted to silence it, wanted to believe in the magic of the night, but the shadow of doubt lingered. Still, for that night, I pushed it aside. I wanted to believe, needed to believe, that we had finally sealed our love. As the night faded into dawn, I lay next to you, watching your chest rise and fall, still wrapped in the warmth of our wedding night. I wanted so badly to hold on to that feeling, that we had finally found our way back to each other, that our love was enough to mend all the cracks. We have bound ourselves together in a way that couldn't be undone. It was the life I'd been yearning for, a life where our daughter had her parents together, where we were a family at last. You had been planning this all along. Even the times you told me to visit were orchestrated, timed to make sure I never crossed paths with her. She was the reason you didn't want me there, the reason you spun lie after lie. And in the end, I was left with nothing but the truth. You had never truly wanted me. You only wanted what you could take from me. But deep down, I knew better. The whisper of doubt from the night before hadn't left me. It lingered, a dark reminder of the lies, the betrayals, the other woman. It gnawed at the edges of my mind, making it impossible to ignore the truth. Our passion may have been real, but it wasn't enough to fix what was broken. There were still pieces of you, pieces of us, that were out of place, and no amount of lovemaking or whispered promises could change that. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The lies, the other woman, the broken promises, they hadn't disappeared just because we'd exchanged vows. They were still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for their moment to reemerge. But I wasn't the same woman I had been before. I couldn't let myself be dragged back into that web of deceit. Not anymore. You see, just 2 days after our wedding, I left to return home. And just 2 days after I left, she came to you. You welcomed her into your home, in your bed, by your side. We had just gotten married. Then 9 months later, she gave birth. The realization shattered me. All the joy I had felt when our daughter was born now felt tainted. Every moment of happiness was overshadowed by the betrayal. You were never truly mine, and our family had been built on lies. Every tear I cried felt like it would never be enough to wash away the hurt. I had to leave you for a moment, to step away and find a way to get control back. My control. I needed to be strong, not just for me, but for our daughter. I had to get us out of the mess we were in, and somehow, I knew the only way to do that was to make you realize that you needed me, that you needed us. I gave you space to realize that the life you said you wanted with me could be worth fighting for. It had to be done, I guess. I had to get you to see that we could only work if we were all in this together, if you were willing to leave everything else behind. Yes, you came back with those same crocodile tears, and yes, again, I accepted you. You said you were finally ready to be the man I needed, the father our daughter deserved. You came home, and for the first time, we were together as a family. No lies, no other woman, no more broken promises. Just us. We were far from perfect, and the scars of our past lingered. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a real future for us. One where you stayed. One where we built the life you promised me. A life for our daughter. Finally, you were home with us, and for now, that was enough. Searching for something, anything, that would free my mind from the confusion I had been drowning in. Maybe I was trying to prove a point, to show my family and friends that they weren't right about him. Or maybe I was just stubborn, refusing to let anyone tell me what to do. It was my life, after all. I was in charge of it, and I was the one who would have to live with the consequences, good or bad. No one else could make that call for me. So whatever happened along the way, I told myself I would deal with it. I thought I was strong enough, smart enough to handle difficult times on my own. Who were they anyway? So-called family and friends. They were the same people who pretended to care, who smiled in my face, and betrayed me the moment my back was turned. They acted like they knew what was best for me, but I saw through them. I saw the two-faced lies hiding behind their well-meaning advice. Plus, I didn't need anyone telling me what to do, who to love, or how to live my life. I was capable of making my own choices, and I didn't owe anyone an explanation. But looking back now, I wonder, was I truly as strong as I thought I was? Or was I just pretending to be, refusing to acknowledge the cracks forming beneath the surface? At the time, I thought I had it all under control. I thought I could handle whatever came my way, including him. The man who would eventually break me in ways I never saw coming. The red flags were there, waving in front of me, warning me to run, but I didn't want to see them. I couldn't. because to see them meant admitting that everyone else had been right all along, and I wasn't ready to do that. But deep down, I knew what it really was, the truth I didn't want to face. I was afraid, terrified, actually, of being alone. I used to see my father sitting by himself in that quiet, empty house, year after year. No partner, no companion, just the echo of a life that had slipped away from him. He had no one to share it with. I watched him grow older, watched the way loneliness clung to him like a shadow. It scared me more than anything. I didn't want that to be me. I didn't want to end up like him, with nothing but memories of what could have been. The fear of ending up alone consumed me, and in some twisted way, I thought holding on to you would protect me from that fate. You weren't perfect, I knew that, but you were there, and being with you, even when it hurt, felt better than the idea of facing a life with no one at all. I convinced myself that maybe you would change, that the pieces would fall into place if I just waited long enough, that the bad times would give way to something good, something lasting. I think I was afraid that if I let go of you, I'd end up like my father, isolated, forgotten, with no one to turn to. I couldn't shake the image of him sitting in that house, alone with his thoughts, alone with the weight of all the mistakes he never corrected. I didn't want that for myself. I refused to let that be my future. So I clung to you. I held on, even when everything inside me was screaming to let go. I told myself that having someone, even someone who hurt me, was better than having no one at all. And maybe that was the biggest lie I ever told myself. I was so afraid of facing the silence, the emptiness, that I kept making excuses for you, for us. I convinced myself that being alone was a failure, that it meant I hadn't done enough, hadn't tried hard enough. And so I stayed. I stayed because the thought of walking away and being by myself seemed unbearable. Even as the red flags piled up, even as the lies and betrayals chipped away at my soul, I chose to ignore them, all because I didn't want to end up like my father. In a way, I wasn't just fighting to keep you. I was fighting against the fear that haunted me, the fear that I would end up living a life without love, without connection, that I would become nothing more than a lonely shadow, just like him. I really set myself up for disaster. I really spent all those years proving everyone right. The same people I swore didn't understand me, didn't know what was best for me. They were right all along. And here I am, exactly where they predicted I'd end up, stuck in this mess I created. I'm so embarrassed, sick to my stomach even, just thinking about how long I let this go on. How did I let myself get so wrapped up in the lies, in the hope that things would change? How did I ignore every red flag, every warning sign? It's like I was determined to self-destruct, determined to prove that I could make this work, even when it was clear to everyone else that I couldn't. I kept telling myself that I was strong, that I could handle it, that love was enough, but it wasn't. Love wasn't enough to fix him, to fix us. I look back now, and I can see all the moments I could have walked away, should have walked away, but I didn't. I stayed because I didn't want to admit defeat. I didn't want to face the truth that I had made a terrible choice, that I had tied myself to someone who was never going to be what I needed. And now, here I am, with nothing but the pieces of a life that was never real. Crazy at how I thought the things he did to me during those trips back and forth, traveling to his country to see him, were bad enough. The lies, the cheating, the way he made me feel small and insignificant. They were painful, but in retrospect, they were nothing compared to what unfolded after I granted him access to freedom, to a new life. I had believed, foolishly, that once he was here with me, once we were living together as a family, things would be different. That the distance had been the problem, and now that we were under the same roof, everything would change for the better. But I was wrong. Once he was here, it didn't take long for the chaos to begin. He made sure I felt every ounce of control slip from my hands, slowly, over time. It wasn't just the lies anymore. He was cold and manipulative, always finding ways to remind me that I was nothing without him. He criticized me for random things, the way I dressed, the way I spoke, and even the way I mothered our daughter. He chipped away at my confidence, bit by bit, day by day, until I no longer recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. One minute he would be cruel, saying things that tore at my heart, and the next he would do something sweet, almost tender. He'd help me comb my hair, kiss my forehead softly. He would tell me he loved me and that I was the only woman who mattered to him. Those moments were like a balm to my wounds, soothing the pain just long enough to keep me hanging on. I lived for those moments, as rare as they were, because they gave me hope that the man I had fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. It took me a long time to realize that some of us aren't as strong as others when it comes to relationships. I thought I could handle it, fix things. But I couldn't see how deeply manipulated I had become and how much of myself I had lost. I was trapped in a life of chaos and destruction, and I had become so conditioned to it that I didn't even know how to get away. Every time I tried, every time I thought about leaving, he would find a way to pull me back. He kept using the same tenderness that once made me fall in love with him. Over time, I began to live with it. It became my normal. The hurt, the pain, the endless cycle of hope and despair, it was all I knew. How could I ask for help when I couldn't even help myself? How could I tell anyone what was happening when, every time I left, I ended up right back in his arms? The truth is, some people break us in ways we never see coming. And sometimes we convince ourselves that the small, fleeting moments of happiness are enough to endure the pain. But they never are. And deep down, I knew that. But I still wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. There were so many moments, so many places we went together where I thought we'd have a good time, where I hoped for a brief escape from the nightmare we lived in. But every time, it ended the same, with me feeling smaller, humiliated, while he wore that smug look, as if my discomfort fed his ego. I remember the night we went to that fancy restaurant downtown. It was supposed to be a celebration, our anniversary no less. I had dressed up, wearing a nice black dress, the one I thought would remind him of how we used to be. The evening started off promising. He complimented me on the way I looked, even held my hand as we walked in. For a moment, I let myself believe this night might be different, but it wasn't. As soon as we sat down, he started making snide remarks. At first they were subtle, comments about the way I ordered my food, little digs about how much I was eating, as if my appearance wasn't good enough. I smiled through it, laughed it off like I always did, but inside, I could feel the familiar knot of shame tightening in my chest. Then it got worse. The waiter came by to take our dessert order, and he turned to him saying, "I hope you've got something low-calorie for her. She needs to keep herself in check." He said it with a smile, like it was some kind of joke, but I saw the way the waiter looked at me with pity in his eyes. I wanted to disappear into the floor. I remember stammering out a response, trying to make it seem like I wasn't fazed, but my hands were shaking and my face was burning with embarrassment. Another time, we were at a family barbecue. I had been so excited to show him off to everyone, to let them see that despite everything, We were still together, still strong. But the moment we arrived, he started picking at me, making fun of the way I interacted with my family, mocking me in front of everyone. It was subtle enough that no one would openly call him out, but I knew what he was doing. He had this way of twisting his words, making it sound like I was the one being too sensitive, too emotional. He humiliated me in front of my father that day, making a joke about how I was Daddy's little girl, like I was still some child who needed approval. My father didn't say anything, but I saw the hurt in his eyes. I felt crushed between the man I loved and the father who had always tried to protect me, and yet I was unable to defend myself. I stood there, awkwardly laughing with everyone, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, I was screaming. And then there was that night at his friend's birthday party. I didn't know many people there, but I thought it would be a fun night out, just the two of us. He spent the entire evening ignoring me, flirting with other women, making sure I noticed. Every time I approached him, he brushed me off, telling me I was being clingy or paranoid. At one point, I saw him with his arm around another woman, laughing with her in a way he hadn't laughed with me in months. When I asked him about it later, he dismissed me, saying, "You're just imagining things. Can't you let me enjoy myself for once?" I stood there in that crowded room, feeling invisible. All eyes were on him, and I was just the woman in the background, the one he kept around to look good but never valued. When we finally left, I cried the entire way home. But he didn't care. He barely noticed. And the next morning, he acted like nothing had happened, like my tears meant nothing. Those moments, the humiliation, the embarrassment, they became routine. I started avoiding going out with him, preferring the safety of staying at home rather than risking another night of being publicly torn down. But even at home, the cycle continued. He always found new ways to remind me that I wasn't enough, that I would never be enough. I kept convincing myself that the small moments of kindness were worth holding on to, that the man who once made me laugh and feel loved was still in there somewhere. But with every public humiliation, every cutting remark, I lost a little more of myself until I was nothing but a shadow of the woman I used to be. As time went on, the pattern became clear, but I still couldn't break free. The moments of tenderness that soothed my wounds kept me tied to him. But there was always something lurking beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The more I tried to understand him, the more distant he became. And it wasn't until much later, after the damage had been done, that I started to see him for who he truly was. The man I thought I knew, the man I loved. He wasn't who I believed him to be. Every smile, every sweet word was carefully crafted, a mask he wore to keep me close. But behind that mask was someone far more dangerous, far more manipulative than I ever could have imagined. This next part of my story isn't easy to tell, because everything you've heard so far, it's only the beginning. The real nightmare was just about to unfold.